Hope was never the soft thing ballads promised. In Theodora Ashford's life, it had always been a hard, splintered thing, a shard she kept hidden in her palm while men with titles and blood claims told her what she owed. A daughter owed obedience, a mate owed heirs, a widow owed silence. Yet even as rain knifed through the pines and the river swelled black at the border ford, she held to one stubborn belief. If she could keep one breath ahead of fear, she could still choose what happened to her child. That belief was the only warmth left in her body. The ford had turned to chaos so quickly that her mind kept replaying it in jagged fragments instead of sequence. Torchlight shuddering in the rain, horses screaming at the slick bank. Her mate, Leon, stepping in front of her with both hands raised because he still believed kin law mattered. He had shouted his name, his lineage, his right to safe passage under moon truce. The men across from him had worn no pack colors, only dark oilskins and steel. Mercenaries. Bought loyalty, not sworn loyalty. She had smelled wolfsbane before she saw the blade. Bitter, metallic, wrong. Leon had turned his head toward her, eyes wide with warning she did not understand in time, and then one of the men drove a short sword under his ribs. He staggered, not yet fallen, as if the world itself had made a mistake, and would correct it if he held still. A second strike took that hope away. He dropped to his knees in the river shallows, rain flattening his hair to his forehead, mouth moving around words she could not hear over the water. She had lunged toward him. A gloved hand caught her wrist. Another hand shoved her so hard she slammed into the wagon wheel behind her. Pain exploded along her left side. The child inside her shifted. A sharp rolling movement beneath her navel that felt like panic made physical. She gasped, and the man pinning her laughed under his hood. "Careful with her," another voice called from the bank. "Her uncle paid for breathing, not bruises." Then he stepped out of the rain, and all the breath left her chest. Drake Shadowfang did not bother with a cloak. Water ran down the furred collar of his black coat, but his posture stayed dry somehow, untouched by weather, untouched by what lay in the river at his feet. He looked at Leon once, briefly, and then at Theodora, and his mouth curved with bored disappointment. "You made this harder than it needed to be," he said. "I offered you a lawful return." "You offered chains," she spat, voice breaking on the last word. "I offered family correction." He moved closer, boots splashing through shallow water. "Now listen carefully. You are coming with me. The child comes too, if it proves viable. If not, we salvage what we can before moonrise makes an heir claim difficult." She froze. Rain pounded her scalp, cold needling into her skin, yet heat rose through her like a fever. "You said what?" Drake's face did not change. "Take her alive," he told the mercenaries, as if she had not spoken. "And cut that child out before moonrise makes an heir." For one stunned beat she could only stare at him, at the man who had once lifted her onto his shoulders at midsummer festivals and called her bright heart when she cried. That memory turned to ash so quickly it made her nauseous. Her body moved before thought did. She drove her heel down on the instep of the man restraining her, ripped her wrist free, and seized the fallen knife near the wagon axle. Someone shouted. Steel flashed. She ducked, felt wind and then fire across her shoulder as a blade grazed deep enough to burn but not stop her. The scent hit a heartbeat later. Wolfsbane resin smeared along the edge. She understood in a brutal instant that they had not just planned to capture her. They had planned for her wolf never to rise again. Run. Now. Do not look back. Leon is gone. If you stop here, your child dies with you. Keep moving. One step, another, another. You can grieve later if there is Ada later. Breathe through the pain. Ignore the blood warmth under your sleeve. Ignore the river roar and the men behind you and the sound your own throat keeps making. You are not prey. You are not property. You are a doorway carrying a life no one gets to own. Trees ahead. Dark between trunks. Take the dark. Trust the dark. Keep your hands over your belly when you jump the roots. Do not fall. Do not fall. She plunged into the pines, branches whipping her cheeks, mud sucking at her boots. Behind her, commands cut through rain. Left flank. She is bleeding. Track by scent. Do not kill her. That last order chased her hardest. She tore her cloak off when it snagged on a low branch and left it hanging like a dark flag for the hunters to find. The rain helped, washing scent into the earth, but the wolfsbane in her shoulders spread in hot, cold waves that made her limbs feel borrowed. Twice she stumbled to one knee and nearly vomited. Twice she forced herself up with both palms braced against wet stone, whispering Leon's name like an oath and apology. By the time the moon dragged above the tree line, a pale smudge through storm cloud, she had lost all sense of distance. She navigated by memory and desperation, a split cedar marked by lightning, a ridge of shale, then the old hunter's path that no longer appeared on pack maps because no one lived this far east after the winter raids. Her uncle would assume she ran south to Allied lands. He would not expect her to cut toward ruin. The shattered outpost rose from the fog like the bones of a beast, half-collapsed walls and a broken watchtower leaning into the wind. Years ago, it had guarded the mountain pass. Now it held ghosts, scavengers, and if rumor was true, Eric Shadowfang and the remnants of the Pack War had failed to erase. She had heard his name in council whispers, brutal, feral, unbending. She had also heard he kept his word once given, even to enemies. Tonight, that made him safer than blood. She reached the gate and pounded once, then again, but her fist barely made sound. Wood scraped. A narrow slit opened. Gray eyes met hers, sharp as winter glass. "State your claim," a male voice said. "Theodora Ashford," she managed. "Sanctuary, carrying life, under moon law." The slit shut. Bolts thudded. For a terrible second she thought they would refuse, and then the gate gave way inward just enough for her to stagger through. 3 wolves in human form ringed her at once, wary and half-starved looking, clothes patched with old leather and stitched fur. One sniffed and cursed softly. Wolfsbane. Another looked toward the courtyard shadows. "Call the Alpha." She tried to straighten, to look less like someone already halfway to the ground, and failed. The world had begun to tilt. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the eaves in a steady rhythm that sounded exactly like ticking time. Eric Shadowfang stepped into lantern light with no hurry at all, and still the courtyard stilled around him. He was broader than rumor, scar at his jaw, dark hair tied back with a strip of plain cloth. Not a king in ceremonial terms, a king in gravitational terms. Every gaze in the yard bent toward him first, then sought his permission before moving again. He took in her torn sleeve, the blood, the swell of her belly beneath ruined wool. Something in his expression changed. Not softness, not pity, but a focused, dangerous attention that made the guards straighten without being told. "Who did this?" he asked. She tried to answer. "Drake. Mercenaries. Ford." Instead, her knees gave way. Eric moved fast enough to catch her before she struck stone, one arm braced behind her shoulders, the other under her legs as if she weighed nothing. Heat radiated off him, startling after hours of rain and terror. His scent was smoke, winter cedar, and the charged tang of air before lightning. "Stay with me," he said, voice low, command threaded with restraint. "You are under my roof now." "He will come," she whispered. "My uncle. Drake Shadowfang. He wants the child." Eric's jaw tightened. "Then he will have to come through me." The words should have comforted her. Instead, fresh fear clawed up her throat because men had promised protection before and delivered cages wrapped in law. She gripped Eric's sleeve with what strength she had left. "No cages," she breathed. His gaze held hers, unwavering despite the blood soaking into his shirt from her wound. No cage, he said. Only choice. He carried her across the courtyard while voices rose behind him, healers summoned, doors thrown open, boots striking worn stone. The hall smelled of old ash and pine pitch, of hunger and endurance. She heard someone say, too quietly, "She will not last the hour." Another answered, "And the babe is fading." The words drifted around her like smoke, nearly unreal. At the threshold of the infirmary, she fought to keep her eyes open, to memorize this face, this voice, in case memory was all she had left by dawn. Eric lowered her onto a narrow cot, then pulled off his gloves and pressed his palm over hers, not trapping, not claiming, only anchoring. 3 breaths with me, he said. She gave him 2 and fell into darkness on the 3rd. Darkness did not take her cleanly. It came in torn pieces, opening and closing around sound. Bootsteps on stone, the rattle of metal basins, a woman's voice, thin with fatigue, saying, "Pulse is threadbare." Another answering, "The wolfsbane has spread too far." Through it all, one constant pressure held her in place, warm and steady at her back, as if someone had braced his body against the storm trying to pull her apart. Eric stood at the bedside while the first healer stitched the shoulder wound and the second pressed listening hands over Theodora's belly. Rain hammered the roof until midnight and then softened to a patient drip through cracked slate. The infirmary smelled of boiled herbs, smoke, and wet wool. 3 cots sat empty against the far wall, linens folded with an order that looked almost defiant in a ruined keep where nearly everything else had been lost. "She has maybe an hour," the older healer said at last, voice low but firm. "2 if the fever breaks. The child's rhythm is weak and irregular." Eric did not look away from Theodora's face. "What do you need?" The older woman rubbed both hands over her eyes. "A moon priestess, fresh silver moss, and luck the gods reserve for legends." "What do you have?" "Me, Leora, 2 apprentice hands, dried willow bark, half a jar of mountain honey. Not enough bandage cloth. Not enough sleep." She swallowed. "Not enough miracles." Around them, his surviving pack watched in silence from the doorway. They were all too thin, too scarred. Men and women rebuilt from the rubble of raids and winter hunger. Every ounce of medicine spent on a stranger carrying a contested heir would cost them something, and each person in that room knew it. Eric finally turned to face them. "No one speaks of cost while she bleeds under sanctuary law." A younger guard, face hollowed by grief, muttered, "Sanctuary does not fill granaries." Eric crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped in front of him, not raising his voice. "Granaries are rebuilt. Honor is not. If our law collapses when tested, then we are carrion pretending to be a pack." The guard dropped his eyes. "Yes, Alpha." "Bring every coal brazier from the East Hall. Heat this room. Then boil water again." Eric held the guard's gaze until he nodded and moved. "Leora, fetch clean blankets from my quarters. The thick ones." He looked back to the healer. "Tell me what to do with my hands." The older woman stared at him for 1 beat too long, measuring whether his resolve was stubbornness or discipline. "She is crashing between chills," she said. "She needs body heat, continuous, skin to skin if you can endure it." "I can." The night thinned toward dawn. They changed soaked dressings. They forced tiny amounts of broth between Theodora's lips when she could swallow. They ground bitter ash bark and moonflower into a paste and spread it along the livid skin around the wound, hoping to draw the poison outward. Each time her pulse fluttered and disappeared beneath the healer's fingers, Eric leaned closer, palm over her sternum, as if he could command her heart to answer him. By first light, the second healer stepped back and whispered, "I cannot feel the child now." Eric's jaw set so hard a muscle jumped near the scar at his cheek. He dismissed no one, cursed no one, struck nothing. He simply climbed onto the cot beside Theodora, settled her against his bare chest, and wrapped both blankets around them. "If she goes," the older healer said quietly, "you may follow from Bonshok. You know that." "There is no bond," Eric said, though something in his tone made the denial ring hollow even to him. "Not yet." He pressed his mouth against Theodora's damp hair. "You asked for choice," he murmured, so low only she might hear if she was anywhere inside that fever haze. "Choose this. Stay." The first day passed in fits and starts. The second day moved like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. Outside, workers reinforced broken outer walls with salvaged timber, while sentries rotated in double shifts. Twice, scouts returned with reports of unfamiliar tracks in the eastern pines and paid riders heading south. Too many for merchants and too organized for hunters. Eric listened, issued orders, and came back to the infirmary before the echoes of his own boots had faded. On the third night, the healers gave up pretending confidence. "She is beyond us," Leora said, voice raw from sleepless hours. "Alpha, hear me. This is not surrender. This is truth." Eric sat on the floor with his back against the cot, Theodora cradled against him. One broad hand spread over the curve of her belly as if guarding both lives at once. Candlelight carved his profile in bronze and shadow. Truth is that she is breathing. Barely. Barely is still. The older healer let out a tired breath, then reached to adjust the blanket around Theodora's shoulders with unexpected gentleness. "If she wakes, there may be confusion. Fear. The poison can leave dreams tangled with memory." Eric nodded once. "If she wakes, I will ask before I touch." Theodora floated through heat and water and grief that would not stay buried. Leon's face kept rising from black river shallows, lips moving soundlessly. Then the scene fractured and became antlers caught in branchlight. Then her mother's hands kneading winter dough in a kitchen long gone. Then Drake's voice saying viable like she was livestock to be judged and priced. "Breathe. Hold the child. Do not let the dark bargain for your silence. I am here. I am still here. Find the beat. Any beat." Through the noise, one rhythm remained unchanged. Deep. Measured. A heartbeat under her cheek, distant at first and then closer, until it seemed to thread through her own chest like a second pulse, teaching the first how to continue. When her eyes finally opened, the room swam in amber candlelight and rough stone lines she did not recognize. For one disorienting instant she thought she was back in Drake's hall, drugged and penned. She jerked, breath snagging, and pain lanced from shoulder to spine. A hand lifted immediately away from her belly. "You're safe," Eric said, voice hoarse from overuse. "You're in the East Keep. No one touches you without leave." She turned her head toward the sound. He was too close. Close enough that his breath warmed her temple. Close enough that his scent hit full force now that fever had loosened its grip on her senses. Smoke, winter cedar, storm metal. It struck her like a bell struck inside bone. The pull came a heartbeat later. Not memory, not gratitude, not simple relief. A molten line tightened from the center of her chest to the life inside her, and then outward, toward him, a braided current that made every nerve in her body lift awake. Her fingers curled hard in the blanket. The child shifted, a clear rolling movement beneath her skin, stronger than before, as if answering the same summons. Eric went still, completely still. Then he drew one sharp breath through his teeth, and amber bled through his gray irises in a rapid, unmistakable flood. The predator beneath his skin surfaced without fully taking form. His pupils narrowed. Gold runes flared once along his forearm where the blanket had slipped, then dimmed again under sheer control. The older healer swore under her breath and backed toward the door, dragging Leora with her. "Out," she whispered to the apprentices. "Now." The room emptied in seconds, leaving only candlelight, rain-muted silence, and the sound of both of them trying not to breathe too hard. Theodora stared at him, unable to look away. The bond sensation intensified with eye contact, threading thought and instinct into one taut line. Her mind recoiled first. Leon. You cannot do this to Leon. You cannot wake in another male's arms and feel your body answer. Shame crashed over her so fast she nearly folded around it. Then another truth rose, harder to deny because it came from deeper than thought. This was not theft, not replacement, not erasure. Grief remained, jagged and sacred. But beneath it, the animal part of her had gone alert with a recognition older than vows signed by councils. Her pulse raced. Her palms went cold, then hot. Every survival instinct that had kept her alive in the pines now pointed not toward flight, but toward him. She hated that. She needed that. She did not understand either feeling. I am not betraying the dead. I am trying to keep the living alive. If this is a chain, I will tear it out. If this is a hand, I might take it. Eric kept both hands visible, palms open on the blanket between them like an oath made flesh. The amber in his gaze receded by degrees, though not completely. Theodora, he said, each syllable deliberate, I need consent before I check your pulse. May I touch your wrist? No alpha she had ever known would have asked. They would have taken, measured, decided, announced. The question cracked something rigid inside her that she had been holding together by force since the ford. She nodded once. Yes. His fingers closed lightly around her wrist. The contact sent a bright current up her arm and into her sternum, then lower, pooling warm around the child. Her breath hitched. Eric's thumb stilled, then resumed, slower, as if he was calibrating himself against both her fear and his own. Steadying, he said, but his voice roughened on the word. Both rhythms. She swallowed. How long? 3 days. The number struck her like a fall. Leon had been dead 3 days. Drake had been hunting 3 days. She had been nowhere, and now here, held between a ruined keep and a male with storm scent and controlled violence in his bones. You should not have spent this much on me, she whispered. Your pack is starving. A humorless curve touched one side of his mouth. They told me the same thing. And you ignored them. I evaluated them. Despite everything, a cracked sound escaped her that might have been the start of a laugh. It hurt, but it was real. Eric watched her with that same dangerous focus he had worn in the courtyard, except now it held something else under it, something almost reverent and deeply unsettled. He released her wrist at once, as promised. The bond is active, he said, plainly, like a battlefield report. I won't pretend otherwise, but I will not claim you in fever. I will not press. You choose each step, or there are no steps. The tension in her chest tightened, then loosened by a fraction. My uncle will come with papers, she said. He will call this guardianship. He will call me unstable. He will call my child property. Let him come. You say that like walls are enough. They are not. His gaze hardened, ancient and feral for a brief second before discipline shuttered it again. But law and teeth together are better than either alone. Outside, a horn sounded once from the watchtower, low and distant. Not alarm. Arrival at the outer road. Theodora felt the bond thread hum between them as if hearing the same note. She met Eric's eyes fully this time, and the room narrowed to that locked line of sight, grief and fear and fierce, unwanted hope braided so tightly she could no longer separate one from another. Then we start now, she said. Eric held her gaze for one long beat, as if confirming that she understood the weight of what she had asked. Then he rose from the cot and crossed to the door, opening it just enough to speak into the corridor without letting the draft touch her. Leora. Broth. salted, fresh bandage wrap, and send Garen to the tower. I want every approach logged by scent and by track, not one or the other. He shut the door again and came back slowly, giving her room to read every movement. You are not attending strategy briefings tonight, he said. You are breathing, drinking, and cursing me for the order if needed. She would have argued with anyone else. The command should have scraped against old wounds, against years of men deciding for her. Yet the way he said it carried no ownership, only triage. She tested that difference with care. You said we start now. We are. He dragged a chair from the corner and turned it so the back faced her, then sat astride it at a distance that kept the bond from snapping too tight. First move is keeping you alive long enough to ruin your uncle in public. The bluntness startled a rough laugh out of her. It hurt her shoulder and made her hiss. Eric did not reach for her, though concern crossed his face in a brief, unguarded flash. Permission to adjust your pillows? He asked. She blinked at him. You ask that every time. I will keep asking. A primary terror she had carried since the ford was that the bond would become another trap, a prettier version of the same cage. Watching him wait, broad hands empty, she felt that terror meet resistance for the first time. Yes, she said quietly. He moved with efficient gentleness, one hand bracing the mattress while the other lifted linen rather than lifting her body, minimizing strain on the poisoned wound. When Leora arrived with broth and clean wraps, Eric stepped back so the healer could work without crowding. He watched, asked sharp questions, memorized dosages, and took every answer without trying to seize authority over medicine. When Leora left, she lingered at the threshold and looked between them, expression unreadable. You should rest too, Alpha. Later. The door clicked shut. Theodora sipped the broth in slow mouthfuls, salt and thyme, and rendered marrow settling warm in her empty stomach. Eric stayed where he was, knees angled toward her but not closing distance. Outside, boots passed in the corridor, voices low, the keep's wounded heart still beating through patched stone. She set the cup down. If we mark now, she said, forcing the words through dry fear, court law would strengthen your claim to protect me. It would, he said. The bond pulsed at the acknowledgement, a hot thread through her sternum. And you are not asking. No. Why? For the first time since she woke, he looked away, toward the cracked hearth where embers glowed red under ash. Because coercion can wear ceremonial clothes, he said. I buried a sister who learned that too late. The room went very still. He had given her almost nothing personal so far, only competence and command. This was different. This was a fracture line. She was promised safety through bond law, he continued, voice flat with old rage disciplined into shape. Her mate used rank and ritual to erase her choices one by one until she no longer recognized her own life. I was not strong enough then to stop it. He looked back at Theodora, amber edging his irises in the candlelight. I am strong enough now. I do not build my house from that kind of silence. Theodora pressed her palm to the blanket over her belly and felt a steady roll beneath. Not distress, not panic, simply presence. Her throat tightened around words she had no skill for anymore. In her mind, thoughts rose in the raw present tense rhythm fear always used. I am waiting for the turn. I am waiting for him to ask for gratitude as payment, for obedience as proof, for my body as strategy. I keep measuring his pauses, hunting for the hidden hook. But he keeps handing me space and calling it mine. He keeps making room where I expect pressure. If I take that room, do I betray Leon, or do I finally honor what Leon died trying to give me? A life not governed by terror. I do not know how to trust a man who could break me and chooses not to. I do not know how to stand down from battle inside my own ribs. I only know I am tired of flinching before hands that have not struck. A knock came, then two quick taps. Garen's signal. Eric opened the door halfway, listened, and gave clipped instructions Theodora could not fully hear. When he returned, his expression had shifted from weary focus to cold calculation. "Riders spotted 3 ridges east," he said. "They turned back when they saw our watchfires. Could be scouts, could be bait." "Drake." "Most likely." He leaned his forearms on the chair back. "Which means the tribunal clock started the moment you crossed my gate." She swallowed the last of the broth. "Then I need to be useful." "You will be. Tomorrow, you dictate everything you remember from the ford while Leora changes dressings. I will have 2 scribes copy it in separate hands. No single record point." His mouth curved without humor. "I learned that lesson in blood and forged ink." He stood then, gathered the cup, and moved to the far corner where a heap of salvaged timber had been stacked under tarp. She watched in confusion as he sorted planks by size, testing each edge with his thumb, setting aside splintered lengths. "What are you doing?" "Fixing the north wall in here," he said. "Draft is cutting too hard near your cot." "That is a job for carpenters. We have 1 carpenter and 23 roofs that leak." He picked up a sanding stone and began smoothing a narrow board with patient, repetitive strokes. "This I can do while staying in this room." She followed his hands as he worked. Not ceremonial hands, not court hands. Scarred knuckles, old bite marks at the base of the thumb, a faint crescent along the wrist where something once tore deep. He measured twice, cut once, and built not a wall, but a low corner cradle against the inner stone, lining it with folded wool, and then sanding every exposed edge until it felt like river glass. "A nursery," she whispered before she could stop herself. His shoulders went still for a breath. "A place for a bassinet when we find one, or a blanket nest for the first weeks." He did not look at her. "I noticed you kept watching the empty corner by the fire." Heat stung behind her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. No one had asked what she watched. No one had listened that closely since Leon. By the second evening after her waking, storm clouds had broken and cold moonlight spilled through the cracked lattice. Leora had changed the wound packing, declared the poison line retreating, and ordered Theodora to sleep. Sleep did not come gently. It never did now. It dragged her under and returned her to river water, to Leon on his knees, to Drake's voice pricing her child by viability. She woke with a strangled cry, limbs locked, breath shredding into short, useless pulls. Shadows jumped huge on the wall. For one disorienting instant she did not know where she was, only that danger had teeth, and she was too slow. "May I come closer?" Eric asked from the floor beside the hearth. The question cut through panic better than any command. She managed a jerky nod. He lit a single candle and set it on the stone between them, low enough that the light did not blind her. He did not touch her. "5 things in the room," he said, voice steady, matching pace to the breath she could not yet control. "Candle. Blue cup by your bed. My gloves on the chair. The crack in that beam above the door. The wool cradle in the corner." Her lungs fought him, then started to follow. He kept counting with her. Not numbers this time, but anchors. "Your heel against the mattress. Blanket under your hand, air in, air out. You are here, not there." She clutched the blanket until her fingers hurt and forced herself to track each detail he named. Candle flame, blue cup, gloves, beam crack, cradle. Reality rebuilt itself one object at a time. When her breathing finally steadied, shame came rushing in after terror, hot and bitter. "I woke the whole keep." "You woke alive." "I sounded afraid." "You were afraid." The simple mercy of that answer nearly undid her again. He remained on the floor, back against a stone, giving her the dignity of distance even now. "You do this often," she said after a while. The 5 things. With pups after raids, with soldiers after night attacks, with myself, some winters. He tilted his head toward her, expression dry. Works on stubborn alphas too, though we complain more. A small, frayed laugh escaped her before she could guard it. He let that sound live, did not crowd it with comfort she had not asked for. 3 days later, she could walk the length of the infirmary hall without swaying. Leora still hovered, muttering about overconfident patients and underfed rulers, but the color had returned to Theodora's cheeks, and the child's rhythm thudded strong under listening palms. Eric called first council at dusk in the old great room, where the roof had been patched with mismatched slate, and the long table bore burn marks from years of siege maps and winter ration counts. Theodora entered on her own feet with Eric half a step to her left, not leading, not guiding, simply present. 15 survivors filled the benches, guards, hunters, 2 healers, a cook with flour on her sleeve, Garen from the tower, and 3 elders whose silence carried more weight than raised voices. The tension hit before anyone spoke. Some eyes held sympathy. Others held arithmetic. Garen opened with road reports, trade caravans diverted, 2 supply caches spoiled by toxin in the grain sacks. A hunter listed traps found sprung near the eastern ridge. Then Elder Maren, thin as a knife and twice as sharp, folded both hands on the table and turned to Theodora. "We are bleeding stores," Maren said. "Your uncle offers grain and medicine for your lawful return. Sanctuary is sacred, yes. So is survival of the pack." The word lawful scraped like rust across bone. Theodora kept her chin level. "My return is not lawful. It is abduction wrapped in forged kin decree." "Forged according to whose witness?" Maren shot back. "A widow in fever, a contested pregnancy, an alpha newly bond-struck." Her gaze cut to Eric. "You risk all of us for a claim that may be sentiment disguised as honor." Murmurs rippled. One guard, Dane, leaned forward, anger bright and poorly leashed. "We are not a nursery for every noble dispute. Trade her, end this, and rebuild." Eric rose slowly. "Sit down," he said to Dain. Dain stood instead. "With respect, Alpha, no. She brought war to our gate." Theodora felt old instinct flare, the urge to make herself smaller, quieter, less costly. It would have been so easy to step back, to apologize for existing in danger's path, to offer herself up so these people might eat. The habit tasted like ash now. "She did not bring war," Eric said, each word precise. "War followed her because cowards wanted to harvest a child by force." Dain made a dismissive sound and reached toward Theodora as if to seize her elbow and turn her for inspection, for proof, for ownership by committee. He never touched her. Eric moved between them with lethal speed, intercepting the arm at the wrist and twisting just enough to break momentum. Dane staggered back, chair legs scraping stone. "Do not mistake my restraint for uncertainty," Eric said. Maren slammed her palm on the table. "Alpha, this room is council, not dominance theater." Eric released Dine and faced the room. "Then hear council law." He drew a breath that seemed to pull the air taut. Under ancient sanctuary statute, any female carrying life under an alpha's protection is untouchable by hand, bargain, or threat until moon court adjudication. Violation is challenge. He looked directly at Dain. On the spot. Dain's jaw clenched. "You would spill pack blood over her." "Over law," Eric said. "Over who we are when starving men ask what ethics cost." The room held, balanced on a blade edge. Then someone at the far end hurled an iron cup. It struck Eric's shoulder with a ringing crack and bounced across the table, spilling stale beer over maps and knuckles. He did not flinch. He did not look for the thrower. He simply set both hands on the table and let his control drop one measured notch. Amber flooded his eyes. Gold runes ignited along his forearms like banked fire drawn to the surface, bright enough to paint the stone walls with moving light. His canines lengthened as the predator surfaced under skin, not unleashed, not hidden. A warning made visible. "No one," he said, voice gone rough with wolf, raises a hand toward her again. Silence slammed down across the room. Theodora watched those runes burn and understood, with a clarity that left no room for old lies, that he was not performing protection for her gratitude. He was staking his authority, his body, and his contested leadership on principle he would have held even if she never chose him. That difference mattered. It mattered more than speeches, more than vows. Marin exhaled first, long and tired. "And when Moon Court sides with Drake, then we appeal with evidence," Theodora said, stepping forward before Eric could answer. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "I will testify under Truthstone. I will submit bloodline records from my mother's chest archive if your scribes help me retrieve them. I will face him in open right where oath magic cannot be bribed, but no one trades me like freight." Garen looked from her to Eric, then nodded slowly. "If she stands in circle law, I will stand witness." Leora added, "So will I." One by one, reluctance shifted into wary alignment. Not trust yet. Not loyalty. But movement. When council adjourned, benches scraped back and people dispersed into corridor shadows, quieter than they had entered. Theodora remained by the scorched table, pulse still high, hand unconsciously cradling her belly. Eric approached only after the room cleared, his eyes gray again. Runes faded. "You did not need me to answer that last challenge," he said. "I know." The bond between them hummed, no longer a panic wire, more like a line drawn taut for crossing. She lifted her gaze to his. "I am still afraid," she said. "But I am less afraid with you than alone." For Theodora, that was not surrender. It was the first deliberate lowering of a guard she had built to survive. Eric received it with the same careful gravity he had shown from the beginning, as if trust were a living thing and he intended to keep it breathing. A knock broke the quiet before either of them could speak again. 3 measured strikes that carried none of Garen's impatience and none of Leora's habit of entering first and apologizing later. Marin stepped inside without waiting for invitation, her lined face carved tighter than before. In her hand lay a leather tube sealed with black wax and the crescent mark of Regional Moon Court. The sight of it turned Theodora's stomach cold. "Ryder came under white flag," Marin said. "Refused food, refused shelter. Said this had to be placed in your hand while witnesses watched." Eric's shoulders went rigid. "Who witnessed?" "Garen and me." Leora joined before seal transfer. Proper enough to satisfy any clerk who likes forms more than truth. Marin looked at Theodora, and for once there was no knife edge in her tone. "I thought you should open it standing." Theodora nodded and pushed away from the table. Her legs held. Barely, but they held. She broke the wax with her thumb, unrolled the parchment, and read until the words stopped being ink and became a trap snapping shut. By decree of temporary kin guardianship, petitioned by Drake Shadowfang and provisionally recognized pending tribunal, Theodora Ashford was declared legally unstable due to fever trauma and contested bond status. Her unborn child was designated an at-risk bloodline asset, subject to seizure for custodial protection. Her late mate's claim was listed as invalid under defect of witness. At the bottom sat a court notation assigning clerk certification to Scribe Halvek of the lower registry. Eric took one look at Theodora's face and did not ask for permission before reading over her shoulder. But his hand stayed open at his side, not touching her. The air in the room thinned around him as he reached the final line. "Halvek," he said, voice clipped. "He served Drake's father before he took a court post." Marin gave a grim nod. "And now he serves whoever buys the cleanest ink." The tube had carried a second folded strip. Theodora opened it with shaking fingers. A narrow ribbon slid out, pale blue silk gone stiff where dark stains had dried across one end. Beneath it, Drake's hand. Dawn gift for my niece. Your sister wears the matching set. Appear obediently when summoned, and I return what family remains. Theodora brought the ribbon to her face before she could stop herself. Lavender soap, rosemary oil, Anwin's scent, faint but real beneath old iron and travel dust. Her knees almost gave then, not from weakness this time, but from the force of memory. Anwin laughing in the old kitchen, flour on her nose. Anwin braiding Theodora's hair and swearing she would one day bite any man who spoke to her sister like property. Anwin at 15, stubborn and bright, still small enough to fit under Theodora's arm when storms frightened her. He has her. He has her breathing somewhere with guards and locked doors, and he sends ribbons like trophies. Eric spoke first, a low, controlled sound that carried more threat than a shout. Garen doubles perimeter. No riders in or out unwatched. Marin, bring the council back. Now. Marin hesitated only a heartbeat. There is more. Grain convoy from Westmark turned this morning. Half the sacks spoiled with ground nightroot and rot mold. Teamster said the marker stamp looked like ours. Someone poisoned roots and framed your seal. Eric's gaze hardened into something ancient. Drake is not just petitioning. He is starving us into compliance. Marin left at once. Theodora stared at the ribbon in her palm until the silk blurred. She had expected violence. Blades made sense. Ambush made sense. This was worse because it was orderly, stamped, witnessed, archived. A legal scaffold built for public cruelty. Eric moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. Look at me. She did, though it took effort. Amber edged his gray irises again, predator and discipline in equal measure. He wants you isolated, panicked, and rushed into private transfer, Eric said. He wants us fighting each other over ration numbers while he calls it due process. We do not play on his ground. He has my sister. I know. He made her proof of life. I know. The words should have shattered her. Instead, they steadied something because he did not soften facts to make them easier to swallow. He stood in them with her. In her head, thought went sharp and immediate, all present tense and pressure. I am back in a corridor with no doors. I can smell the wax and silk and old fear. If I choose wrong, Anwen pays. If I hesitate, my child pays. If I trust law, law may hand me over with signatures and bowed heads. I want to run because running once kept me alive, but running now hands him the story he wrote for me. Unstable widow, frightened vessel, unfit to choose. No, I am not a vessel. I am not collateral. I am blood and oath and memory. I am the sister who taught Anwin to climb orchard walls, and the mate who watched Leon die standing. I can shake and still decide. I can be terrified and still refuse. I do not need the fear to leave before I act. By first light, the old great room had become a war table and law chamber at once. Garen pinned road maps beside copied statutes. Leora counted antidote ingredients while muttering darkly about idiots with poison and no respect for womb-safe dosages. Marin, still severe, read the petition aloud so no one could claim ignorance later. Every line sounded cleaner than the harm it concealed. We answer on 3 fronts, Eric said. Evidence, supply, and witness integrity. If anyone fails, Drake argues emergency custody. Theodora stood at the table's edge, one hand braced near the map weights, the other over the life moving under her ribs. He forged kin authority by erasing maternal law, she said. My mother kept a chest archive in Ashford's lower chapel. Birth ledgers, oath marriages, blood adjudications. If the codex pages still stand, they outrank his guardianship petition. Garen frowned. Ashford lands are watched. Not the old drainage route under the chapel cistern, she answered. It floods in spring. Most guards forgot it exists because it smells like dead reeds. A brief, startled grin cracked Garen's face despite the stakes. That is the first useful thing I have heard all morning. Eric pointed to the map. 2 runners, not one. Separate routes. If one falls, the other arrives. Leora. Prep sealed samples from Theo's blood and wound tissue. We prove wolfsbane exposure from capture attempt. Marin. Draft notice demanding open tribunal at Stone Circle under oath magic. We force him into public right. The room shifted around that decision. Public meant witnesses. Public meant less room for knives in shadow, though never none. As the meeting thinned, Theodora remained, copying dates from memory with cramped fingers while Eric dictated to a scribe in the doorway. The pull between them had changed over the past days, no longer an alarm flare but a low current that sharpened when one moved too far from the other. It rose now as he stepped behind her to place a second candle by her page, close enough that heat from his skin brushed the nape of her neck. "May I?" he asked quietly. "Press here." She knew what he meant before he touched her. The scar line at her shoulder had begun to ache where tension gathered. Yes. His thumb found the knot beside the wound and held steady pressure, precise and brief, enough to drain the ache without claiming comfort she had not asked for. Her breath left her in a long, shaky stream. "You are shaking," he said. "So are you." That drew a rough half-laugh from him. "Fair." For a moment the room narrowed to candlelight, ink, his hand lifting away the instant relief took hold. No ceremony, no demand. Only 2 wounded people standing in a ruined keep with too much at stake and too little sleep. By the second dawn after the petition, the first external reply returned from Moon Court. A magistrate's assistant had penned it in polite, distant language that made Theodora want to tear the page in two. Petition received. Emergency claim noted. Tribunal date granted in 9 days unless exceptional instability required immediate transfer. 9 days. Long enough for pressure to become hunger, hunger to become panic, panic to become concession. The assistant avoided naming Drake's scribe at all, Marin said. Either they fear him or they are bought. Eric folded the letter once, neatly. Then we give them facts they cannot ignore, and witnesses they cannot dismiss. Drake gave no pause in return. Another dawn brought another ribbon, this one green, the edge torn as if cut quickly. Anwen's scent clung fainter now, but still there. With it came a list of demands phrased as concern. No armed escort at tribunal, no rival alpha standing within 10 paces. Theodora to submit private medical examination by court-appointed men. Leora read that line and swore with inventive precision. Over my dead body and several of theirs. Pressure mounted through every corridor. Supply counts dropped. 2 hunters returned sick after tasting tainted water near the eastern spring. A Westmark trader sent word refusing further exchange until allegations of sanctuary violation were cleared. Dane, chastened after counsel, volunteered for double wall shift without complaint and took a thrown insult from another guard without starting a fight, as if trying to repair what had cracked. The keep ran on grit, discipline, and the stubborn refusal to yield language to those who used law as a weapon. At night, sleep came in short fragments for Theodora. Eric kept his promise and never touched her unasked, but he remained near during storm hours, a solid presence by the hearth while she worked through ledgers and names. Once, when thunder rolled over the mountain and her breathing started to climb, he tapped the table twice and said, "5 things," and she answered before panic could root. "Candle, red thread spool, your knife, the north beam scar, my sister's ribbon." His gaze softened at the last item and then sharpened again, as if gentleness itself required vigilance. On the fourth evening, just as cold rain began needling across the courtyard, Garin returned soaked and furious with one of the runners half carrying him. "Chapel archive hit," Garin said, water and mud dripping from his cloak. "Not by chance. Lock broken clean. Ledger shelves burned. Whoever did it left the stone saints untouched and took only record boxes." Theodora felt the floor tilt. "Any pages left?" "Char, at best. We pulled one tin case from under collapse." He set it on the table. Inside lay warped parchment, half-legible names, and one seal impression from Ashford Maternal Council older than Drake's claim by 2 generations. Not enough to end him. Enough to wound his narrative. "We can still use this," Marin said, already sorting salvageable pieces. "With oath testimony and witness chain." Eric nodded. "And we move tribunal request to immediate threat status. Tonight." They wrote through darkness. Leora prepared moonflower and ashbark distillate in case Theodora's old poison flared under stress. Marin compiled attack sequence. Garin listed sabotage incidents with times and trail signs. Theodora signed each page with a hand that cramped and steadied and cramped again. At midnight, a trusted courier left under Wolf escort toward the regional court. The strike came before dawn could answer. The first warning was not a horn but a smell, sharp and bitter, pouring under the infirmary door, burning nightroot and lamp oil. Then the eastern bell clanged twice. Stop, start, stop. The code for breach attempt at unfinished wall. Eric was already moving when the second clang hit. "Stay with Leora," he said, and was gone into the corridor with Garin and 4 guards at his heels. The keep erupted around Theodora in layered noise, boots pounding, shouted positions, the crack of wood giving way somewhere beyond the inner yard. Through the slit window she caught flashes of torchlight and rain, figures at the outer ditch, and smoke crawling low instead of rising, meant to choke and disorient rather than burn structures down. Leora shoved a cloth over Theodora's nose. "Nightroot smoke. Slow breaths. Keep low." A young guard stumbled in with watering eyes and a cut along his brow, not deep but bleeding enough to blind one side. "They came with court badges," he rasped. "White flag wagon at East Gate, then smoke pots under canvas and 6 men over scaffolds." Disguised as law again? Always law first, then teeth. Theodora pushed to her feet, dizzy but upright. "How far in?" "Outer yard contested, inner gate holding." Another horn sounded, this one from the north tower, long and urgent. Garin's runner burst through moments later, chest heaving. "Alpha says lock infirmary and move Luna candidate to the vault passage." Theodora caught the words and the omission in one breath. "Not if possible. Not now. Move." Then the runner added, voice cracking. "And he said tell her this was diversion. Riders peeled south in the dark before breach. We tracked late. They are heading for Blackstone Way Station." The ribbon in Theodora's pocket seemed to burn against her palm. Blackstone was where Drake kept private holding rooms between territories. Not rumor. She knew the route from childhood journeys she had pretended to sleep through. "Anwen," she said. Leora's face went pale. "Theo. No." From the yard came a roar that could only be Eric, followed by the metallic crash of gate braces taking impact. The stones underfoot shuddered once. Critical had arrived, not as a single blade but as converging lines. A breached wall, smoke in the halls, court corruption in ink, and her sister being moved while everyone able to stop it bled at the gate. Theodora tied the cloth tighter over her mouth, grabbed the salvage tin of maternal records with one hand and the nearest lantern with the other, and looked at Leora with a steadiness that felt forged in fire. "Get these pages to Marin," she said. "If I do not come back, they still go to Circle Law. But I am not letting him vanish with my sister while I hide underground." Another impact shook the keep, closer this time, and from somewhere beyond the smoke Eric shouted her name. Another impact shook the stones, and Eric's voice cut through smoke and steel from the courtyard below. Theodora! She stepped into the corridor anyway. Leora caught her forearm. If he sees you in open line, he will split his focus. He already has to split it. Theodora pressed the salvage tin into the healer's hands. Take this to Marin. Guard it like breath. Then she moved, one hand braced on the wall as nightroot haze burned her eyes and throat. The keep had become a narrow world of alarms and drifting gray. Guards ran past with wet cloths over their mouths. Somewhere above, Garen shouted tower counts in clipped bursts. The eastern bell rang again, then stopped with a sound like metal choking on itself. At the turn toward the inner yard, she found Eric at last, half-shifted and terrible in the gatelight, rain slicking his hair to his neck. Gold runes burned along his arms as he held the broken brace beam in place, with 3 others while defenders reset the crossbar. A cut tracked down his temple, shallow and ignored. His gaze snapped to her, fury and relief colliding in a single breath. I said vault passage. And I said no hiding while he moves my sister. For one raw heartbeat, he looked as though he might carry her there by force. Then discipline won. He released the beam to Garen and crossed to her, stopping just short of touch. Status, he said, voice low, battle rough. Riders peeled south. Blackstone route. She nodded toward the gate smoke. This breach is noise. He bared his teeth in a humorless acknowledgement. I know. A horn answered from outside the walls, long and formal this time, the call used by court envoys. The clamor at the breach faltered. Through the smoke line, a white flag wagon rolled into view between shield ranks, Moon Court Crescent painted on both doors. 2 mounted clerks rode ahead, one holding a silver staff of office high enough that no archer could claim confusion. Marin appeared at Theodora's shoulder with the seal tin clutched to her chest, and Leora behind her carrying a satchel of wrapped vials. Courier from Regional Court arrived at North Post 10 minutes ago, Marin said. Emergency order accepted. Immediate tribunal under oath magic to prevent further bloodshed. Where? Eric asked. Stone Circle at Red Hollow. 1 hour. Drake laughed from beyond the outer ditch, close enough now that she could pick him out through rain and smoke, black coat dark with water, expression calm as prayer. How efficient, he called. My niece finally receives proper process. Process with smoke pots and forged badges? Garen shouted back. Drake spread his hands. Bandits borrow many uniforms. Must I account for every criminal who likes my colors? Theodora stepped forward until she stood in full view of both lines. Her shoulder throbbed under the old wound. Her child rolled once, steady and strong, and she held that movement like an anchor. You sent ribbons from my sister, she called. You poisoned roads and filed petitions in the same breath. His smile thinned. Come with me, and she comes home. Stay with him, and courts will decide what remains of your rights. A mounted clerk raised the silver staff. By order of Moon Court, all hostilities cease pending immediate circle hearing. Any strike after this call is contempt. Rain hissed on shield rims. No one moved. Eric leaned close enough that only she heard him. We can still evacuate you west and contest later. Later is what he wants. She met his gaze. I end this where lies cannot stand. By the time they rode for Red Hollow, dawn had begun to bleed through cloud in thin iron light. The road cut along wet granite and dead fern, slick enough that every hoof step demanded care. Theodora rode between Eric and Marin, wrapped in a fur cloak that smelled of cedar and old smoke, her knife at her hip and her pulse too fast to hide. Behind them, Garen escorted the court wagon while Leora guarded the satchel of blood samples and antidote vials as if it held crown jewels. At the hollow, the ancient circle rose from the hill like a jaw of standing stones, each pillar etched with oath runes gone pale from centuries of rain. Court guards formed 2 arcs at the perimeter. Drake arrived from the opposite ridge with Halvek beside him, and 6 men in polished breastplates, all carrying the same legal calm that had already killed too many people without drawing a sword. The magistrate, a broad-shouldered woman named Eileen Vero, stepped into the center and struck her staff once against the Truth Stone altar. Silver light rippled out along the carved channels in the ground. "Speak true, or choke on your own oath," she said. "This rite binds blood, not rank." Theodora walked forward before anyone could advise caution. She laid her palm on the stone and let the magistrate's blade score a clean line across her skin. The sting was sharp, clarifying. Blood beaded, then sank into the altar grooves, waking old runes that glowed faintly under her hand. Inside her mind, the noise surged and narrowed, fear and fury and memory all pressing at once. I am standing where he cannot edit me. I am shaking and still upright. I can hear Leon in the river and Anwen in the kitchen and Eric saying, "Choose, always choose." Drake wants me frantic because panic reads like guilt to men who worship paperwork. Breathe, name facts, hold sequence. Do not let him bait you into fragments. My body remembers cages. My body also remembers running until my feet bled and not stopping. This is not running. This is turning around. This is saying my name where everyone can hear it and refusing to lower my eyes. If my voice breaks, let it break on truth, not silence. Eileen turned to Drake. "State claim. Temporary guardianship over my widowed niece and custodial protection of unstable bloodline issue," he said smoothly, "supported by certified clerk testimony and kin decree." "Submit certification." Halvek stepped forward with sealed papers. Theodora watched his hands. Court wax should have smelled of cedar resin and chalk. His seals carried clove oil and lamp soot, the same blend she had smelled on the false petition tube. "Those were recast," she said, "not struck at lower registry." Halvek's mouth tightened. "Grief distorts scent memory." Marin barked a hard laugh. Convenient argument from a scribe who served Shadowfang household before taking court stipend. Eileen signaled 2 clerks, who took the papers for inspection. Counterclaim. Theodora lifted the tin case from Marin and laid warped pages on the altar one by one. Ashford maternal adjudication ledgers. Fire damaged in targeted archive raid last night. Enough survived to establish maternal council precedence over collateral male guardianship in pregnancy disputes. She pointed to a scorched seal impression. This mark predates Drake's line authority by 2 generations. Garen stepped in next, mud still on his boots. "I testify to staged breach at East Wall using court insignia as cover. I testify to separate rider group moving south toward Blackstone during diversion." Leora followed, voice steady and cold. "I testify to wolfsbane tainted blade wound on Theodora Ashford consistent with capture assault. Samples drawn, logged, sealed. I also testify she was lucid when giving account after fever broke." Drake's control slipped at the edges. "You gathered a charming theater troupe." Theodora faced him fully. "You sent me my sister's ribbon with blood on it." He gave a small shrug. "Proof of life motivates compliance." A murmur ran through both witness lines. Eileen's expression hardened. "Produce the sister now." Drake did not answer quickly enough. Then one of his own guards shifted weight, eyes flicking toward the south path, and that was answer enough. Eileen struck her staff again. "Detain Scribe Halvek pending forgery review. Seize all submitted decrees for chain verification." Drake Shadowfang. Step to binding mark. He smiled like a man indulging children. "You overreach." He moved anyway, 2 paces, then stopped short of the sigil ring. "Niece," he said, louder, honey overwrought. "You know your fear makes you reckless. Come stand at my side and I will forgive this." Theodora heard Eric take 1 step behind her and halt, exactly where court line required. The bond between them drew tight. Not possession. just force, held in check. I remember every word at the ford, she said. Take her alive. Cut that child out before moonrise makes an heir. Drake's gaze went flat. You were always breeding stock, never blood. He lunged. Theodora had been waiting for that exact break in rhythm. She slammed her bleeding palm down on the truth stone and spoke the old activation clause from the scorched ledger fragment, voice ringing across the hollow. By maternal right and witnessed oath, I call the circle to bind oathbreaker blood. Silver fire shot through the runic channels and climbed Drake's legs in spirals of light, locking at knee, hip, wrist, throat. He roared and half-shifted, one arm tearing free in a burst of sparks, claws flashing as he drove toward her again. Eric hit him mid-stride. The impact knocked both men through rain-slick gravel to the inner ring. Eric rolled first, pinned Drake face down, and drove his forearm across Drake's shoulders with controlled, crushing force. Drake thrashed, snarling, but the remaining sigils cinched tighter every time he fought. Hold, Eileen commanded. Kin judgment belongs to claimant. Eric looked at Theodora, chest heaving, eyes feral amber and asking without words. She nodded once. He shifted his weight and forced Drake to his knees at the altar. A court guard offered the ceremonial silver blade to the magistrate. Eileen turned and held it out to Theodora hilt first. Rain ran down Theodora's face as she took it. Her hand did not shake now. Drake lifted his head with effort, hate bright and naked at last. You were meant to kneel. She stepped close enough that he could not mistake her expression. You taught me fear was inheritance. She set the blade point over his heart. Tonight I end the line of it. The strike was clean and final. Drake's body jolted once, then went still against Eric's hold. The light in his eyes dulled to ash gray and did not return. Silence held the circle for 3 long breaths. Then horns sounded from the south path. Garen turned, hand on sword, and broke into a rough, disbelieving grin as 3 riders crested the ridge with court escorts around them. In the center saddle sat a young woman wrapped in a torn green cloak, wrists bound in front but posture unbroken. Anwen! Theodora's voice cracked on the name. Anwen slid from the horse before anyone could help and ran the last steps uphill. The sisters collided hard enough to stagger, arms locking around each other, both laughing and crying with the same breathless disbelief. Eileen's staff struck stone one final time. By witnessed right, Drake Shadowfang judged oathbreaker and lawfully executed by kin claimant. Forged guardianship void. Emergency custody petition dissolved. Theodora Ashford restored to full legal standing pending final decree at Moon Court. Halvek tried to bolt. Marin stuck out a boot and sent him sprawling into mud, where 2 court guards promptly hauled him upright in irons. Rain eased to a fine silver mist as if the sky itself had exhaled. Eric came to stand beside Theodora and Anwen, close enough that warmth reached her through soaked wool. Far enough that choice remained visible between them even now. When Theodora looked up at him, exhausted and trembling and still standing, he bowed his head once, not as alpha to subject, but as a man honoring the woman who had just remade the law around her own name. She held his gaze through the rain haze, then turned to Magistrate Eileen before the trembling in her legs could take her down. I request claiming right, she said, voice rough but clear. Private, except 2 lawful witnesses. My choice, my timing. Eileen studied her for a long breath, then nodded. Granted. Witnesses? The healer who kept me alive, Theodora said, reaching back for Leora's hand. And the elder who brought me the petition instead of burying it. She met Marin's sharp eyes. If she accepts. Marin's mouth tightened as if holding back more feeling than she wanted seen. I accept. The circle cleared in disciplined silence. Garen moved court guards to the tree line. Anwen squeezed Theodora's fingers once, fierce and proud, then stepped away with tears still drying on her cheeks. Eric waited exactly where he stood until Theodora crossed the last distance herself. Only then did he lift his hand. "May I touch you?" "Yes." His palm settled at her waist, warm through soaked wool, steadying without steering. They moved to the inner stones where the truth light still glimmered in shallow channels. Rain softened to a fine mist, and the hollow smelled of wet granite, pine sap, and distant smoke from quenched torches. Theodora's heartbeat still raced from battle and judgment and relief. Underneath it, the bond thrummed like a low, bright note rising toward completion. Eric searched her face with a gravity that made every word feel like oath. "You can stop this at any breath. You owe me nothing for protection, nothing for survival, nothing for what happened here." "I know." She touched the scar at her shoulder where Wolfsbane had nearly ended her life. "I am not paying debt. No. I am choosing." She slid her hand to the back of his neck, fingers finding rain-cold skin and the pulse under it. "You. Us. This child. This pack." The feral edge in his eyes gentled into something deeper than hunger. He lowered to one knee before her, then bared his throat first, head tipped back in open surrender. A king yielding his most vulnerable point to the woman he loved. Not theater, not strategy. Trust made visible. Theodora's breath caught. She cupped his jaw, thumb against the scar at his cheek, and felt the bond tighten in answer. "Mine," she whispered, astonished by the rightness of it. His hands came to her hips, careful and reverent. "Yours," he said. "Mate." The word passed between them like a lock turning. She nodded once. "Mark me." He rose, slow enough for refusal, and brushed rain-damp hair from her neck. "Here," he murmured, fingers ghosting the junction of shoulder and throat. "It will hurt for a heartbeat. Then it changes. I am ready." His mouth touched her skin first, a warm press that steadied rather than startled. Then his canines pierced with controlled force, sharp pain flashing white along her nerves. She gripped his shoulders hard, a sound breaking from her throat. Before fear could climb, heat followed the pain, flooding outward in silver-gold waves that rolled down her spine and through her chest, then lower, circling the child in a pulse of fierce protective warmth. Her knees weakened, not from injury, but from the intensity of being known at every level at once. Memory rushed through the bond and fragments that were not hers alone. Eric as a younger wolf in snow-dark woods, blood on his hands and grief in his mouth. Nights rebuilding walls by moonlight, his sister's grave under a cedar ridge, the instant he caught her at the gate and understood he would burn his life down before letting harm take her. In return, she felt her own truths pour into him unshielded. Leon's last look, the river, the pines, the word viable spoken like a sentence, and the stubborn shard of hope she had carried anyway. He released immediately, tongue sealing the mark with gentleness that made her shudder. Gold threads flared into sight around both their wrists, fine as spun metal, winding once, twice, then sinking beneath skin. The hollow brightened as if moonlight had dropped through cloud at noon. Eric rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "Mine," he said, not possessive, but awed. "Yours," she answered, and pulled him down by the back of his neck. She turned her head and bit over his pulse, hard enough to mark, hard enough that copper touched her tongue and his breath broke on a low, startled sound. Power answered power. The bond surged again, no longer a single line but a woven current, balanced and reciprocal. His hands tightened at her waist, then opened, as if reminding himself even now that surrender was part of devotion. When she released him, a bright crescent stood at his throat. He looked wrecked and radiant at once. Amber bled through his irises, and there were tears he did not hide. "Mate," he whispered. She leaned into him, forehead to forehead, shoulders shaking now that the danger had passed. No cages. Only choice. They stayed like that while the bond settled from wildfire to steady flame, their breathing finding the same rhythm, the child beneath her ribs moving once in calm response. Behind them, Leora made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Marin cleared her throat with suspicious force and said, "Witnessed and lawful," though her voice was unsteady. By dusk that same day, they stood in Mooncourt's lower hall, while clerks unrolled seized decrees for chain review. The clove oil seals were matched against registry wax and condemned as recasts. Halvet confessed when shown the cent ledger and the bribe marks in his account book. He lost his scribe cord and was remanded to labor judgment under guard. The forged guardianship petition was struck from record. Theodora's blood samples and wound reports were entered into permanent archive as proof of capture attempt. The ribbon Drake had sent was catalogued, then returned to Anwen at her request. She tied it around her own wrist and did not remove it. Eileen read the final decree aloud before witnesses from 3 packs. Theodora Ashford, restored to full legal standing by blood and oath, recognized co-ruler by Ashford maternal right, and bonded mate to Eric Shadowfang, lawful alpha of the rebuilt Shadowfang territory. Any claim against her person or child without her consent will be treated as treason under Moon Law. Anwen stood on Theodora's left, chin high, free and furious and alive. "I am filing for my own training placement," she told the magistrate when asked her wishes. "Healer Trek, with Leora, if she will have me." Leora snorted. "I will have her if she stops arguing with dosage tables." "Never." "Then we start with bandages." Marin, listening from the back, gave Theodora a long look that finally paid out its meaning. "I threw words like stones when you arrived," she said quietly. "I do not take them back. We needed the truth of what hunger does to judgment. But I will spend what years I have left making sure no council under this roof ever confuses desperation for license again." Garen took command of a new law and road watch, pairing 1 guard and 1 clerk on all future envoys so no seal would travel without scent record and witness chain. Dane requested assignment to nursery wall duty and kept it without complaint, building shelves with hands that had once reached in anger. On a thawing night in early spring, labor took Theodora in the same keep room where she had nearly died. The repaired north wall held the wind out. The wool cradle Eric had sanded smooth, waited by the hearth. Leora directed the room like a general, Anwen at her side passing cloths, and water with focused hands, Marin timing contractions with stern precision that fooled no one about her fear. Eric knelt at Theodora's shoulder, offering his hand and his throat and every breath he had. When the final pain crested and broke, a strong cry filled the room, bright as a bell. Leora lifted a dark-haired infant slick with new life and grinned so hard her whole face changed. "Healthy lungs," she announced. "Healthy heart." Eric's tears fell openly onto Theodora's knuckles as he kissed her marked shoulder. "You did it." "We did," she corrected, exhausted and radiant, as their daughter was laid against her chest. At the first full moon after the birth, the rebuilt courtyard blazed with torchlight and silver banners. Wolves and humans crowded long tables heavy with bread, roast roots, winter apples, and casks, saved for peace. The healer sanctuary doors stood open on the east side of the keep, stocked and staffed, its lintel carved with 1 line Theodora had chosen herself. "No life abandoned here." When Eric and Theodora stepped onto the stone dais with their child wrapped in fur between them, the pack bowed as one. Not to a survivor alone. Not to an alpha alone. To a chosen pair who had remade law into shelter. Eric took her hand where all could see the settled glow at their wrists. "Mine," he said softly. She laced her fingers through his. "Yours." Together they looked over the people who had become their home, and when Theodora spoke, her voice carried to the far wall. "Mate."